they don't understand what the point of it all was, because school was all about working up towards, final days where you sat your exams, got your results, that told you who you were and what you could go on to next, and off you went. And I think if we do anything, it would be to acknowledge that and say how sad that is, and how can we make sure that every day at school is about much, much more than this kind of linear journey towards a destination.
Hey Lawrence.
Hey Josh.
I've been thinking about the podcast. How about in the first series we focus on the pandemic?
Yeah, and in each episode we can ask our guest how it's been affecting them and what they do.
We could ask people to join in with the hashtag #PosNegative.
How would we introduce it each week?
We'll just say, welcome to Positive Negative. My next conversation is with Penny Rabiger. I met Penny earlier this year at a conference for educators run by the wonderful Highland One World organisation in Inverness. She was a guest speaker alongside Lisa Williams of the Edinburgh Caribbean Association, and they both covered some fascinating ground, particularly around ways of widening our perspectives and broadening our understanding of the world. We explored quite a lot here, and you'll find links to most things mentioned in the episode's description. Penny also gave us some recommendations for other things to read, watch and listen to, and we'll be sharing those on our social media. Anyway, here she is.
So I'm Penny Rabiger, and I am an ex-teacher who, since leaving teaching over a decade ago, I have been working in the kind of start-up to grown-up sector in education, and sort of getting involved in things around helping school leadership, helping schools to collaborate with each other, and most recently I'm working with a Finnish-British education organisation called Lyfta that helps teachers and children to explore the world through short documentary and all sorts of interesting issues around inclusion, diversity and so on. I also do quite a few bits of voluntary work, so I'm a chair of governors at a primary school locally to me, and I'm also on a multi-academy trust board, and I'm co-founder of the BAME Ed Network, which is a network for Black, Asian and minority ethnic educators and also white educators who are interested in making sure that our BAME colleagues progress or enter the profession, progress within the profession, and are interested in exploring issues around structural racism and hopefully dismantling those as well. I think that's everything that I do.
Yeah. So are you busier than normal on all of those fronts, or are some busier than others? Or?
Yeah, I haven't noticed any kind of slowdown. I think what's changed is sort of finding the ways to keep momentum going online, remotely. Obviously, my colleagues on the BAME Ed Network, most of them are all of them are working in full-time jobs in other things, but most of them are working as head teachers or university lecturers, or really on the front lines of education. So I think it's been interesting trying to make sure that we carve out time also to meet and to be active, despite all the things that they're having to suddenly pivot and do differently.
So do you want to just give us an idea of the impact that the lockdown has had on you personally, first of all?
Well, me personally, it's interesting. I feel incredibly privileged. My children are teenagers and quite sort of self-contained and happy to be doing their own thing. Their schools have given minimal sort of stuff to do, so they have a light workload which they just get on with. They're missing their friends, but they do nice things like baking cookies and just dropping them off on the doorsteps of friends, nice. And things like that. So So on that front, I feel really, really privileged because I see friends and colleagues who are really struggling with smaller children, with all sorts of things going on. My partner works at a university, and so for him this is like a gift because he can just be at home, get stuck into reading, thinking, writing, researching. Obviously there's lots of team meetings and things like that, but he's also really happy. So I feel I feel a little bit of cabin fever, but comparatively speaking, I feel it's fine. It's just like somebody's just pushed a kind of pause button.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people that have said very similar. I spoke to a PE teacher a couple of days ago, and he said he's never been fitter in his life because he's now able to kind of go out and exercise at any time he wants, and he's been able to read loads and obviously balancing the work, but he does feel a little bit guilty about feeling so positive in so many ways.
Well, I think it's interesting because one of the things, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the things I think that's really come through is my responsibility as part of the whole to keep myself healthy and to that, mentally and physically healthy, because that's going to help other people. If I don't need, health services, or I'm fit and well and doing okay, then I can support other people. So I'm kind of trying to hang on to that rather than feeling guilty.
Yeah.
In terms of fitness, I mean, I have joined my 14-year-old who's decided to do this build a six-pack. I must say I'm lagging behind, but one shouldn't compare oneself to 14-year-olds when they're as old as me. But so I'm kind of getting into that. But I used to play on a kind of local. Well, I still consider myself, I do play on a local netball team, and I really miss that, not just because of the exercise, but also just because of the comradeship with local women, and, it's a bit like a soap opera. We catch up on each other's lives, and I really miss that kind of side of physical activity, yeah.
No, I think it's going to be so good when we're able to just join in with other people in really simple activities again, I think.
Yeah, and I do think a lot about some of my single friends who are living alone. That's really hard, and listening to them talk about the fact that they haven't, felt somebody hugging them or just a touch on the shoulder at work, or things that they're accustomed to. Just that absolute physical isolation, I think, is really hard. It's not something you can even compensate for over a Zoom call or or cookies on the doorstep. It's not going to help.
Yeah. So would you like to just talk a little bit about the impact that it's had on the people you work with or for?
Yes, so Lyfta, it's very interesting what's happened with us, because prior to the whole lockdown situation, we were delivering face-to-face training, but a lot of webinar training, so online CPD for teachers around sustainable development goals, global learning, and weaving in our resources to their existing curriculum aims. And that was going quite well. And since lockdown, it's really taken off even more so. So where we were seeing, we'd have 3 webinars a week and we'd have maybe 30 or 40 people on those, we're now seeing huge numbers of teachers taking part in that. So that's great. And it's great, I think, because teachers are, looking for ways to continue their development. And also, I think what's really nice for us with the work that we do, that it's more relevant than ever. So it is about human stories, it's about empathy, it's about inclusion, it's about celebrating difference. And I think that's what people are thinking a lot about. So that's been really good. We've also been able to be quite innovative, and we've developed a new app for parents who are struggling at home with children and want children to be able to do some kind of meaningful screen-based activity that doesn't need too much parental intervention. So that's also been really a affirming, and it's made us feel really positive that we can quickly pivot and develop something like that.
Is that available already?
Yes, it is. It's just being launched this week.
Right.
And then we've been funded by the British Council, and they've had to freeze the funding, which is a bit of a blow for us, but we've decided to keep delivering. It means that it's free for schools, basically, for teachers to do the training with us. And we've decided to just keep going and offering it for free and seeing what we can do in terms of reaching out for funding from other sources and just trying to make it work. So that's quite hair-raising, but I think it's the right thing to do, and that's also interesting. In terms of other work, the school where I'm chair of governors, it's been really interesting, and I'm going to try and write a blog about this with the head teacher. So what's been so interesting is that the school's been able to focus much more keenly on things that actually really matter. So we were waiting for, not waiting, but we're expecting to be inspected soon, and that was quite, it's quite a pressure, although we try to never do anything for the inspectorate or because we're about to be inspected. We try to make sure that we're just doing the right things for the right reasons. But with that lifted, and with families at home, we've been able to really focus on the welfare of families, and there's been some great things that have come out of that, which I can talk about later maybe. And then the BAME Ed Network. So we were supposed to be having a conference on the 30th of May, and obviously we can't do that now. We're going to take that conference online, and we have support from Leeds Beckett University to work with us, and so we've started thinking really big about some kind of international conference and how we would run that in a slightly different way and reach out even further. So I think it's there's opportunities. Obviously it's difficult. And I think also the business that I work for, we have teams across different cities in the UK, and we have team members in France and in Finland. So it's been interesting kind of going fully remote. We were always partially remote with little teams together in different offices and then gathering remotely. But I think that's been interesting, and I've been really interested in how our leadership has really tried to focus on our well-being. So our meetings once a week are all about how are you and what are you feeling, not what have you achieved, are we on track? That comes later. But
is that something you would normally discuss, or would it come up at all, or just a tiny bit? Why do you think maybe that we're kind of doing that more now that we're not seeing each other?
Well, I think our organisation is quite special in that it's a lot about people and human feelings, and I think I've worked in some really special places, but I don't think I've met such a eclectic mix of very special people. So I think us in particular, we will always tend to focus on how people are before kind of target hitting and productivity conversations. But I think generally people are more mindful of people's mental health and their well-being and what they need. I certainly think that employers are starting to think about the complexities of what working from home actually means for different people. So juggling children and your own children and teaching is quite difficult. There's a population of younger teachers who, especially in London, who can't afford to live on their own, so they're going to be living in a house share. They don't have a place to be to responsibly deliver online lessons without somebody wandering past in the background, or without children seeing their bedroom. It's not appropriate. So I think people are thinking more in terms of the whole person and the home person, and not just separating them off as a work persona, which I think can be a really good thing.
Yeah. Could I just backtrack a little bit, just to, you mentioned global learning, and just for people that aren't involved in education, could you just unpack that just a tiny bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll unpack it through my own lens of what I think it is, but I'd have to Google the official title of it, what it means, definition of it. But for me, it's about making sure that our learning happens within a context of not just facts and knowledge, but that the facts and knowledge and wider curiosity includes us as part of a global landscape, so that we are interconnected across the world. And I think for my work, what it also involves, it's a lot around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals, which we are supposed to be teaching young people, and we are, as humans across the globe, meant to be working towards. But there's certainly in this country, there's a real kind of misunderstanding that they belong to over there. So some of the global goals, for example, are things like, no hunger, zero hunger, or good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, and we often think that hunger is about, what we call developing countries, and we often the vision that we see, or the images that we're shown of hunger are, tropes about starving African children and so on. But I think we should know, and we definitely will know now that it's been so impacted upon through the crisis that we're going through now, that hunger happens here. A third of children in this country live in poverty, and most of those families that live in poverty are working poor. So it doesn't even fit the trope of, the feckless people who don't want to work. So I think that's what global learning is about. It's about bringing the world into the classroom, about seeing yourself as a global actor who, whatever we do impacts upon the whole globe, and whatever other countries do impact upon us. And you can't see it more clearly than this pandemic.
And you mentioned being on the board of school governors, and I know in the recent piece you wrote, you mentioned you kind of went through the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and you pointed out some of the inequalities. You mentioned the digital inequalities for some people, the expenses at home, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Is there a real divide kind of showing in the conversations you're having with parents or not having with parents and pupils? Are these inequalities really becoming more pronounced as a result of the way we're working at the moment?
I really think they are. I know they are. So colleagues who work in schools in the independent sector, or people that I know who have children who go to independent schools, their curriculum is continuing. The children are taught between 9 and 3:30. They're on a full timetable. They can assume that every child has a bedroom, a device, and reliable internet access. And then if you take, schools like the one that I work with, there's a real range of access. So the school has had to think about producing things that are pen and paper, and maybe not even pen and paper. So, what activities can you do that don't even require any equipment at all? So I think there is a massive gap, and that gap is just widening. I think there are also other things. The fact that, this isn't about digital inequality, but this is just structural inequality. The fact that teachers now are going to have to estimate what grades they think children will get in their exams that have been cancelled. So here we have GCSEs and A-levels, so they're taken at age 16 and 18 usually. they're going to have to predict what grades they would have got, and there's a lot of research and writing around bias and how that plays out, and how children from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds, predominantly Black children, will be under predicted, and exams are actually a really good way for them to smash those biases, because they can on the day of the exam perform, whereas stereotypically, you know, our expectations of some groups of children will be much lower. So there's quite a lot of anxiety around that, quite rightly, and how to bring that to the fore, and, you know, kind of try and tackle it head on.
So is there anything that the BAME Ed Network are doing to kind of address that, or are there other people that are kind of tackling that to make sure that bias doesn't happen?
So we're not directly campaigning, but we've joined up with organisations that are, and we're trying to do our best to amplify those. So there's been some really good writing and challenge and petitioning and so on, just to make sure that schools and also, you know, the exam boards really, first of all, acknowledge that this is a thing, because I think whenever you talk about bias, then unfortunately people become quite fragile and quite they try and disassociate themselves and try to make it a personal thing, and it's not. It really is about conditioning, it's about society, it's much deeper than just the individual, but individuals can make a difference if they acknowledge it. So we're trying to amplify as much as we can.
And I know when we met before, you mentioned that one thing you try and do is to have dialogue with people that you disagree with as much as possible. And I thought that was a really important thing that probably a lot of us shy away from, but that we should probably do every day, really. And I wondered, at the moment, with, you know, quite divisive news reporting going on, and the fact that we're in kind of a state of chaos to some extent, the people that want to divide us, it's a really good opportunity for them to do that even more. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on why perhaps it's even more important now to have dialogue with people that we disagree with.
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting, because I kind of laughed when you were saying it, because I feel I have much less resilience and tolerance now to dialogue on Twitter or Facebook or, you know, other places. I'm finding myself picking up my phone, looking at it, and just feeling like I want to just write inappropriate things, you know. And I've connected with quite a few people who feel the same, that they're like, wait, why do I hate everyone now? You know, I feel so much rage. So yeah, I think it is important to listen to what people are saying, especially if you disagree, because there's several reasons for it. One, know thy enemy. Yeah. So you know, you've got to understand what's the rationale behind somebody pushing some agenda or another agenda, and it can get really interesting, and it can help you to dismantle that responsibly and calmly if you do need to be actually in direct dialogue. So for example, there was quite a big thing around eugenics and the belief that you know, people of colour are somehow genetically substandard, and that's infiltrated within, you know, right into kind of top level government in England, those views. So it is really important to understand, what are those views, where did they come from, why were they useful to people in order to hold on to power or exclude sections of society. It's difficult to read and to engage with it, but it's really important. So I think on that level, if you can kind of engage with it historically, intellectually, and so on and so forth, I think being in a Twitter spat with people who just annoy you and who are saying things that are unpleasant, maybe that's not great, especially now when we're all a little bit not ourselves in terms of mental health and well-being. But I don't know, I am interested to understand where people get their ideas from, and it often exposes in me a real lack of understanding or knowledge, which makes me want to kind of learn a bit more, which is never a bad thing.
And another thing we spoke about before was about the decolonisation of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Would you, just for people that haven't come across that before, would you mind just kind of unpacking that as well, just to give a brief kind of overview of what that means?
Yeah, I'm not a great expert on it, and I definitely draw on other people's expertise, and I'm learning about it. But I think it's about... So I think if I look at the English education system, it's and English history, there's been a process of excluding voices. So I think it's about bringing in all of the narratives when teaching, or as many narratives as possible. And I think some of the things that we forget, for example, when we're teaching history, is we forget that people of colour, for example, have been in this country forever. Forever. I was looking at the Runnymede Trust's Our Migration story. It's a really, really good online resource that just looks at migration to this country. And I was particularly interested in, how long have Jewish people been in this country, because I am myself Jewish, and I thought that would be really interesting to look at. And you can see from, 7th century, there's mention of Jewish people being integrated into English society. So I think it's about making sure that we're not telling just one story, and that we are including all of the voices. And the difficulty with it is that there's a kind of confirmation bias, right? So, white men seem to have done well in science, therefore we think that white men are the only scientists. So it's about making sure that you tell the stories that aren't being necessarily told now, and integrating that. And I think another thing to be really clear about is that schools often think that they should teach, what they call a diverse curriculum, or teach diversity in the curriculum if they serve a diverse population. And I think that's something that really interests me, that actually, yes, of course, but also if you don't serve a diverse population, and your children are predominantly one culture, that's even more reason to bring in, additional voices. So that's my understanding of it.
So do you think that this will kind of be a bit of a reset for the education system as a whole, or do you think it will be more of an impact on the individuals within it? What kind of impact do you think it might have?
So I think we need to separate out the curriculum and giving stuff for kids to do at home, because I think what has been clear is that prior to this, many English schools all English schools were all about thinking about what their curriculum is, because the focus of our inspectorate changed, and it was about the curriculum and not necessarily about the results out the other end. So that gave a lot of place for teachers and whole, schools and multi-academy trusts and local authorities and everybody else to be thinking about what is the curriculum, what's the right thing for children to know at different times. I think in this situation, I'm hearing that a lot of people are like, well, we can't really progress with any new learning because we need to teach it, and we can't be certain that every single child has got it. So we're going to give things that are more around revision or more around exploration, or, so I don't know if there is a kind of sense that teachers feel empowered to think, oh, I know what's a really good sequence of things for children to be doing now independently, perhaps with a bit of help from an adult at home. So I'm not sure how empowering it is. I think there's been a kind of scramble to get stuff together. There's been some groups of teachers or multi-academy trusts that have put together really nice resources, and the BBC has put together a nice resource. So there's things that people can use, but I don't think there's been a really clear focus on, wow, how should we do things differently when we come back at all, sadly. And I think it's difficult to focus on that,
Well, I guess we kind of we still don't know how long. I think, are we in week 5 now? Is it week 5? Or I've kind of lost track a little bit.
Yeah, it is. It's week.
Yeah. And we're having some updates apparently next week, I think. So I guess, we're just all dealing with it week to week at the moment, I think. That's certainly how I feel anyway. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I do feel quite strongly about is that it's really exposed that the point of school now has been about what you get in your exams, and that's really sad. So there's children who have their exams have been cancelled and they don't understand what the point of it all was, because school was all about working up towards these final days where you sat your exams, got your results, that told you who you were and what you could go on to next, and off you went. And I think if we do anything, it would be to acknowledge that and say how sad that is, and how can we make sure that every day at school is about much, much more than this kind of linear journey towards a destination.
So just moving on a little bit, what inspiring stories or actions have you seen since the pandemic has started?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit earlier about the school where I'm Chair of Governors. So amazing things have come out of the fact that the school is closed, which is, it was partially closed. We were serving key worker children, but after preparing everything for that to happen, no children showed up. So, and it is a very small school, so that's not unusual. But what we have found is, so we serve quite a diverse population, but a predominantly, quite a huge number of children on free school meals, so children who are living in poverty or near poverty, children who have English as an additional language, children who have arrived very recently to this country and are just acclimatising, and so are their families. Quite a lot of struggling families, and some of those families it's difficult to communicate with them for many reasons, and it's difficult to have a relationship with them that the school feels that they should have. So it's about, we often say it's difficult to reach parents or parental engagement, but I think it's about kind of building a relationship. Now, what we've seen is that parents we never hear from are calling the school and asking for support. And they're clearly saying where they need support, and we're clearly able to help them. And that might just be, actually, I need stuff. I need paper and pen to do this exercise with my son, or my son doesn't understand what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and nor do I. Can someone just walk me through it? So that's really great, because we're able to have a really positive interaction with that parent, send them on their way. Parents are kind of reporting that their relationship with their children is changing, and that they get a little bit more what their children are doing at school and how they should organise themselves and so on. So that's really nice. Teachers also shining, just being very innovative, making sure that they're thinking about all sections of the school community when they're creating resources. And then other things are the great links with the community. We're feeding families, so we've got great links with different organisations and charities that provide food, with supermarkets that are dropping off food that is near its sell-by date, and we're able to really have an impact on the whole family. And I think that's, to me, those are things, that's what school is. School is a community. It's not just about learning in the formal way. So I think that's giving the school a lot of hope, and making I've never seen the head teacher so energised, which is, it's a tough job being a head teacher, but she's so energised and so innovative, and it's great to see. So those are positive stories that I can see.
Wow, that's really good to hear. So I should have asked you this maybe earlier on, but and you've kind of said it a little bit. How are you feeling today?
I feel good. It's kind of my day off, so it's the day that I usually pack in loads of interesting, different things to my interesting and different work week. It's a nice sunny day. The kids are making scrambled egg. It's everything's good. I feel good.
I read earlier on, I've forgotten I might pronounce this incorrectly. Is it Ikagi? Is that the...
Oh, yes. I think it's... I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but I say Ikagai, but it might be
that sounds
wrong.
a bit more Japanese. Yeah. Would you say that you're... would you just be able to just tell people what that is and whether that kind of relates to how things are at the moment?
Yes. So it's basically... It's a kind of theory. I kind of felt like I was living it before I understood or knew about this theory, but it's about the intersection between kind of doing what you love, what the world needs, what you're paid for, and what you're good at. And quite early on in my kind of working life, I thought, I can't really do a job that I don't feel passionate about. But I am the sort of person that even when I was working, weeding in a kibbutz vegetable garden or something, I'd find a way of loving what I was doing. But I think it's Ikigai is that sweet spot where you do what you love what you do, you're good at it, you're paid for it, and the world needs it, and you feel a sense of kind of passion, mission, profession, vocation, all rolled into one. That doesn't mean that I spend my whole day kind of leaping about feeling self-satisfied. And, there are tough days. But I think that sense of moral purpose and that sense of being grateful to be paid to do what you love does get me through darker days, definitely. I think that's what drives a lot of teachers as well, is that moral purpose. A lot of people in different professions find that.
Yeah, I think I kind of get the sense that all of this is making people think a little bit differently and maybe getting that balance a little bit, or finding that balance a little bit more if that's possible. I know that's not possible for everybody, but...
Yeah, I hope it also helps people to stop looking down on people who are in work that we see as, unskilled or... Because we've suddenly realised how essential it is to have delivery drivers. We might not want that for our children, for them to be a professional delivery driver, in our minds. But, gosh, we can't cope without them. Now we're like, I'll just order that online and somebody's son or daughter will bring that to me. So I hope it helps us understand, all forms of work and life.
Okay, so in what ways do you hope all of this will shape the future?
I feel quite pessimistic that we're going to learn much. It's sad, but I hope that we will see more clearly than ever the structural inequalities that are holding back huge sectors of society and that are making other kind of the ruling classes richer than ever, because in amongst all of this there are some people who are making a fat buck from what's happening, and I think we should really shine a light on that. I hope also that, so there's been a lot of kind of acts of kindness and, clapping on the doorsteps and people sort of stopping to appreciate. I'm not a great fan of kindness in itself, and I think what I value more, that is a more powerful form of kindness, is about collective social responsibilities. So I'm hoping that these acts of kindness will be a kind of gateway to people building those into their life as habits. So, for example, if you are lucky enough to have a cleaner and you're lucky enough to be still working and receiving a salary, are you paying your cleaner even though they can't clean your home? You should be. And I think people need to think about that in terms of collective social responsibility, redistribution of wealth, all of those sorts of things. And for us to think about fairer pay and conditions for freelance people who provide essential services. I think that, this gap between rich and poor has been growing during the last decades, and we keep saying the virus doesn't discriminate, but the outcomes and the inequalities for sections of society, it really does accentuate that discrimination, less access to resources. I'm also hoping that there's people have realised, the air's a bit cleaner, and there seem to be animals wandering around, in towns and cities, and sort of animals we thought were extinct have suddenly popped up and so on. So I'm hoping that there'll be more of a focus on sustainability and on climate change. And I would love to hope that schools would spend time thinking about their digital strategy. So not just for their students, but also for staff CPD. So, I mentioned that we've seen a huge number of teachers passing through our online training. I really hope we don't just all go back to the same kind of factory education. But I also don't think that online education is the future. I think there's a real place for interaction, discussion, disagreement, all of that. So those are some of my hopes.
Is there anything that I haven't asked or that you would like to talk about that I haven't kind of given you the opportunity to?
I'm not sure. I'm interested in the series that you're doing and what your hopes are for it, and what kind of voices you're hoping to bring, and where you hope they'll reach.
Yeah, I guess our idea was to, because we felt like we were living in our own bubble, really. And so we kind of thought that in having conversations with a really diverse group of people, or we hope a really diverse group of people, that we could kind of see inside other people's bubbles a little bit, which would in one sense help us to not be so insular in our thinking, but then also to just kind of tap into the what you might call the everyday that other people are experiencing. So nothing maybe necessarily that profound from the outside, but just simple things that people are doing day to day, or simple feelings that people are feeling, or experiences that they're going through that we thought might be interesting. I know a lot of the podcasts and things that I've listened to over the years, by far the most interesting ones are the ones where you speak to, just a normal person, or someone that you'll never read of ever again or hear of ever again, probably. Just really simple kind of storytelling about what they're going through, and I think those kind of stories really kind of are really impactful, I think. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to be as amazing as that, but we're just trying to speak to different people from different sectors and different ages and different parts of the world as well. So yeah, that's the kind of the aim of it, really, just to burst our own bubbles a little bit, and to kind of make connections between what everybody's going through, I suppose.
Yeah, interesting. Global learning through podcast.
Through podcast.
That's great.
All right, thanks so much, Penny.
Yeah, great. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Positive Negative.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at PosNegative, or find us on Facebook.
And join in the conversation using the hashtag PosNegative.
You can help us to grow by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with your friends and followers.
You'll also find links to what we've talked about in the show notes, all by visiting positivenegativepodcast.com.